I am Riley, 32 years old, and until last night, I was the invisible financial backbone of a family that despised me. My mother left a scathing voicemail officially banning me from my sister's lavish housewarming party, claiming my boring presence would humiliate her perfect son-in-law. Her final words to me were that they were moving on without me. She had no idea that as she spoke those words, I was staring at the exact $1.5 million wire transfer meant to buy that very mansion. I simply smiled, canceled the transfer, and froze every credit card in their names. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who mistook your kindness for weakness. The rain beat against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Manhattan apartment. The city below was a blur of headlights and neon, but my attention was entirely focused on the phone resting on my kitchen island. It was playing a voicemail on speaker mode. The voice echoing through my quiet sanctuary belonged to my mother, Patricia. "Riley, we need to have a serious discussion about the housewarming party this weekend." Her tone was that familiar mix of condescension and fake sweetness she always used right before delivering a crushing blow. "Chelsea is incredibly stressed with the pregnancy, and Jamal is bringing his senior law partners to see the new estate. Frankly, your plain clothes and boring conversation are just not the right fit for this crowd. You always bring the mood down, and we cannot have Jamal looking bad in front of his bosses. You understand, right? We are moving on without you. Do not bother showing up." The voicemail ended with a sharp click. I stood there in the silence of my kitchen. I did not cry. I did not throw my phone across the room or scream in frustration. 10 years ago, a message like that would have shattered me. I would have spent hours agonizing over what was wrong with me, wondering why my own mother found me so thoroughly repulsive. But at 32 years old, I had endured enough of Patricia's venom to build an impenetrable armor. My sister Chelsea had always been the golden child. She was a glittering socialite whose only real talent was spending money she did not earn. Jamal, her husband, was an arrogant corporate lawyer who treated me like the hired help at every family gathering. They were the perfect glamorous couple in my parents' eyes. I was just the quiet, analytical middle child who preferred spreadsheets to society galas. For years, I had been the scapegoat, the punching bag, the family disappointment. I picked up my phone. I did not type out a long emotional paragraph demanding an explanation or begging for their love. I simply typed a single word. "Okay." I hit send. Then I walked over to my home office, powered on my dual monitors, and opened my secure banking portal. The screen glowed with the pending transactions of the family estate. Right at the top of the queue was a pending wire transfer. $1,500,000. The destination was an escrow account for a massive newly constructed mansion in the affluent hills of Connecticut. The very same mansion Chelsea and Jamal were supposed to be showing off to those high-profile law partners this weekend. They had spent months selecting the house, demanding the absolute best upgrades, and picking out imported Italian marble for the bathrooms. When it came time to pay, they simply forwarded the massive invoice to the family trust, assuming the invisible administrators would quietly clear the funds, just as they always did. They thought they could banish me from the celebration of a home that was being purchased with my authorization. The sheer audacity of kicking out the person secretly funding their entire existence was almost comical. I reached for my security token and logged into the portal using my master credentials. The screen refreshed, granting me full access to the deepest financial archives of the estate. At the top right corner, my official title displayed clearly in bold letters: Managing Trustee. Seeing that title next to the astronomical sum of money triggered a vivid memory. The physical act of gripping my mouse, hovering the cursor over that pending wire, transported me back to a sterile hospital room 5 years ago. My grandfather Theodore, the fierce founder of our family real estate empire, was lying against crisp white pillows. His breathing was labored, but his eyes were as sharp and calculating as ever. While my father Richard, my mother Patricia, and Chelsea were out in the hallway loudly complaining about the hospital cafeteria food and debating which country club membership to upgrade next, my grandfather had pulled me close to his bedside. He pressed a heavy leather-bound folder into my hands. "You are the only one with a head on your shoulders, Riley," he had rasped, his grip on my wrist surprisingly strong. "Richard is a fool who wants to play big shot. Patricia only cares about designer labels, and Chelsea is a bottomless pit. They will drain this family dry if they get their hands on the main accounts." He coughed heavily, catching his breath before delivering his final absolute command. "I am making you the sole managing trustee. Protect the legacy. Let them think the lawyers run it, but you hold the keys. When they finally show you exactly who they are, and they will cut the cord." The memory faded, leaving me sitting in the quiet hum of my home office. They had definitely shown me who they were today. Patricia's cruel voice echoed in my mind one last time. "We are moving on without you." I looked at the $1.5 million wire transfer that would secure Chelsea's perfect life and Jamal's bragging rights. My finger clicked down on the mouse. Cancel wire. A red confirmation box popped up on the screen warning me that canceling this transaction would disrupt the closing of the property. The prompt asked if I was absolutely sure I wanted to proceed. I did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. I clicked yes. In an instant, the pending transfer vanished from the queue. The money was routed safely back into the main trust holding account. The Connecticut mansion was officially unfunded. The grand housewarming party they were so desperate to keep me away from was now going to be held in a house they did not own and could not afford. But canceling the house was not enough. The rot in this family went much deeper than a single real estate transaction. For 5 years, I had quietly approved their exorbitant monthly allowances, managing the trust invisibly to keep the peace and honor my grandfather's memory. I had absorbed their insults while signing the checks that paid for their luxurious lives. That arrangement ended tonight. I navigated away from the escrow page and opened the master list of secondary credit cards issued to Richard and Patricia. These were the premium metal cards they used to fund their daily illusions of grandeur. I reviewed the recent statements scrolling across my screen. Patricia had charged $12,000 at a luxury boutique just last week for dresses she would wear exactly once. Richard had put a massive down payment on a new sports car he absolutely did not need. They lived like royalty on funds they believed flowed endlessly from a magical, faceless corporate entity. I selected every single active card under their names. The interface brought up a secondary menu with a list of administrative actions. I scrolled past the option to adjust their spending limits and hit the option at the very bottom. Freeze all accounts. The system paused, asking for my final authorization code to execute a total financial freeze. I typed the numbers in smoothly, feeling a profound sense of justice wash over me with every keystroke. The screen flashed green, confirming that all financial lifelines to my parents and my sister were officially severed. I pictured Patricia at her exclusive salon tomorrow morning, handing over her platinum card for an expensive facial only to have the machine blare a declined notification. I pictured Richard at the country club trying to buy an extravagant round of drinks for his friends, being pulled aside by a confused manager. The golden child and her enablers were now completely on their own, stranded in a reality they had never prepared for. I closed the laptop, walked into my kitchen, and poured myself a glass of red wine. I took a slow sip, looking out at the city lights. Tomorrow the storm would hit, and for the first time in my entire life, I was the one holding the lightning. The morning sunlight sliced through the sheer curtains of my Manhattan apartment, but it was the aggressive, relentless buzzing against my mahogany nightstand that actually pulled me from my sleep. I rolled over and picked up my phone. The screen was a chaotic waterfall of notifications, 46 missed calls, 32 unread text messages. They were all from a group chat titled Family Updates, a chat I usually kept muted. I sat up, the crisp white sheets falling away, and watched the notifications continue to pour in. Patricia had called 12 times. Richard had called 8. Chelsea had sent a barrage of texts entirely in capital letters. But it was the missed calls from Jamal that caught my attention. Jamal never called me. To him, I was merely the administrative nuisance attached to his wife's family, the boring sister who handled the mundane paperwork so the real adults could focus on their elite lives. I swung my legs out of bed and walked into the kitchen. I poured filtered water into my espresso machine, taking my time. The machine hummed to life, a soothing contrast to the digital panic radiating from the device in my hand. I tapped the voicemail icon and pressed the speaker button. Jamal's voice filled the quiet space of my kitchen. "Riley, pick up the phone right now." His voice was sharp, coated in his usual arrogance, but beneath the surface lay a brittle layer of sheer panic. "I do not know what kind of technical glitch your banking portal is having, but the escrow funds for the Connecticut estate have not cleared. The sellers are sitting in the conference room at the title company, and their attorneys are threatening to pull out. They are talking about suing us for a breach of contract. Do you understand what that means? It means we lose the house, and my firm gets dragged into a public legal battle because of your incompetent bookkeeping." In the background of the recording, I could hear Chelsea wailing. Her voice was shrill, complaining that the stress was bad for the baby, demanding that Jamal fix it immediately. Jamal's voice grew louder, practically shouting directly into the microphone. "You need to get down to the Oak Ridge Title Company in Connecticut immediately. Bring your laptop. Bring whatever security tokens you need. You are going to sit here and manually push this wire transfer through before the sellers walk away entirely. This is a simple administrative task, Riley. Stop screening my calls and fix your banking glitch right now." The message ended. The automated voice announced I had 3 more identical messages from Patricia and Richard, all echoing the same narrative. It was my fault. It was a computer error. I was the incompetent bookkeeper who had failed to execute a basic instruction. I took a slow sip of my dark espresso. The rich, bitter taste grounded me perfectly. For my entire life, this was exactly how they had treated me. Whenever anything went wrong, regardless of who was at fault, the blame was swiftly and decisively placed on my shoulders. When Chelsea wrecked her first car at 16, Patricia told the insurance company I had been distracting her from the passenger seat. When Richard made a terrible stock investment that tanked his quarterly earnings, he blamed me for distracting him with my college tuition requests. They had constructed a comfortable reality where I was the perpetual scapegoat. Because I had spent the last 5 years quietly managing the family trust from the shadows, making sure their bills were paid and their allowances cleared, they assumed I was just a glorified secretary. They had entirely forgotten that my grandfather had legally stripped them of their power and handed the reins to me. They thought the trust was an endless magical fountain of wealth, and that I was merely the plumber hired to keep the pipes clear. My phone buzzed again in my hand. Another text from Jamal illuminated the screen. "If you are not at the title company in 1 hour, I am calling the managing board of the trust to have you fired for gross negligence. Get here now." I smiled, setting my empty espresso cup into the sink. The threat to have me fired by the managing board was the funniest thing I had read all morning. Jamal, the brilliant corporate attorney, had never bothered to read the actual unredacted trust documents. If he had, he would have known there was no managing board. There was no faceless corporate entity overseeing the wealth. There was only me. I walked back into my bedroom and opened my expansive walk-in closet. Today was not a day for the plain, boring sweaters and sensible slacks my family expected me to wear. Today was a day for armor. I bypassed the casual section and reached for a pristine, tailored charcoal designer suit. I pulled it off the hanger, the heavy, luxurious fabric feeling like a promise against my skin. I picked up my phone, opened the family group chat, and typed a single response. "I am on my way to Connecticut. Have all parties wait in the conference room." I locked my apartment door behind me, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor of the hallway. The financial execution I had initiated last night was about to hit them in person, and I was not going to miss a single second of the fallout. The elevator ride down to the private parking garage felt different today. Usually I use this quiet minute to brace myself for whatever new criticism my mother had invented, or whatever unearned demand my brother-in-law was about to make. Today my posture was rigid, my shoulders squared beneath the sharp cut of the charcoal blazer. As I slid into the driver's seat of my car, The quiet hum of the engine matched the steady, calculated rhythm of my pulse. Before shifting into gear, I connected my phone to the dashboard console and dialed my corporate attorney, Marcus. He was not one of the crusty, passive lawyers on the family trust retainer. Marcus was a bulldog I had personally hired 2 years ago for this exact inevitable day. "I need you on standby," I told him, keeping my voice clipped and professional the moment he answered. "The wire transfer is officially canceled, and the credit cards are frozen across the board. I am heading into the lion's den right now. Be ready to file the injunctions the second they try to bypass my administrative authority." Marcus let out a low, appreciative chuckle over the speakers. "The freeze is already making waves, Riley. I just got an automated alert that Richard's platinum card was declined at his country club breakfast buffet 20 minutes ago. Give the word, and I will lock down the secondary accounts too. Hold off until I look them in the eye." I replied, a cold smile touching my lips. I want to watch them realize the well has run dry. I ended the call and steered my car out of the city, merging onto the highway heading toward Connecticut. The morning sun was glaring, reflecting off the wet pavement from last night's storm. It was an hour-long drive, giving me plenty of time to mentally prepare for the sheer volume of entitlement I was about to face. Halfway through the journey, the dashboard screen lit up with an incoming text message from Chelsea. I tapped the screen to have the system read it aloud. The automated voice stripped away my sister's usual whining tone, but the words were just as toxic. "How could you mess up the paperwork today of all days? I am pregnant and stressed. Jamal's partners are going to be here at noon. Fix this banking glitch right now, or Dad says he is cutting your allowance." The sheer delusion of that threat almost made me laugh out loud. My allowance. They had convinced themselves that the modest salary I drew for managing their massive, chaotic expenses was a charity stipend they controlled. They truly believed I was just a clumsy bookkeeper who had accidentally pressed the wrong button. Chelsea was playing her favorite card, using her pregnancy as an absolute shield against any inconvenience. Whenever she wanted something, she was a fragile victim. Whenever she got her way, she was ruthless. I ignored the message, leaving her on read. Let her blood pressure rise. For once in her life, Chelsea was going to experience the word no. I pulled into the affluent, manicured heart of the Connecticut suburb. The escrow and title company occupied a sleek, luxury glass front building, nestled among high-end boutiques and artisanal coffee shops. It was an office designed to make wealthy clients feel secure and pampered while signing away millions of dollars. I parked my car, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the crisp morning air. I smoothed down the front of my designer suit. This was a stark contrast to the plain, invisible wardrobe they demanded I wear, so I would never outshine my sister. Today I was not blending into the background. I walked through the heavy glass doors with purposeful strides. The receptionist looked up from her polished desk, her polite customer service smile faltering slightly as she registered my uncompromising demeanor. "I am Riley Sterling," I announced, my voice carrying a quiet, undeniable authority. "I believe my family is waiting for me in the main conference room." The receptionist nodded nervously, gesturing down a wide, carpeted hallway. She could clearly feel the toxic tension radiating from that room all morning. I approached the massive, heavy oak door at the end of the hall. Through the frosted glass panels, I could see the blurred, frantic movements of 4 distinct figures. I gripped the cool metal handle, pushed the door open, and stepped across the threshold. The atmosphere inside the conference room was suffocating, thick with the smell of expensive catered coffee and stale panic. Richard was pacing furiously near the floor-to-ceiling window, his face flushed a deep, dangerous red. Patricia sat at the head of the massive mahogany table, aggressively tapping her manicured fingernails against the polished wood in a rapid, agitated rhythm. Chelsea was dramatically fanning herself with a glossy real estate brochure, loudly complaining to no one in particular about her stress levels. And Jamal stood right in the center of the room, his arms tightly crossed over his chest, exuding a toxic mix of unearned arrogance and absolute desperation. As the heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, the frantic pacing and complaining stopped instantly. 4 pairs of eyes snapped in my direction, wide with fury and shock at my appearance. The glaring, heavy silence lasted for one agonizing second before the explosion began. Jamal slammed both of his hands flat against the polished mahogany table. The loud, sharp smack echoed violently off the glass walls of the conference room. He did not ask what went wrong. He did not offer a greeting. He simply attacked. "What is wrong with you, Riley?" he barked, marching toward me with his chest puffed out in a display of pure, unadulterated arrogance. What is exactly wrong with you? How does a low-level number cruncher botch a simple routine wire transfer? A simple wire transfer. It was one transaction, one basic job. All you had to do was click a button and let the trust money flow like it always does. He paced back and forth, rubbing his temples in a highly exaggerated display of professional frustration. His expensive watch caught the light, a watch likely paid for by the very funds he was currently screaming about. The sellers are literally sitting in the next room. Their lawyers are breathing down my neck. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is for me? For me, a senior partner in waiting to be sitting here dealing with your incompetent bookkeeping? You were supposed to process the paperwork. You were supposed to stay out of the way. Now you are making me look like a fool in front of people who actually matter. Before the echoes of his shouting could even settle, Patricia stepped forward. Her perfectly highlighted hair bobbed as she pointed a manicured, accusing finger directly at my face. Her eyes were narrowed with the familiar disgust she reserved exclusively for me. "You are embarrassing us, Riley. You are embarrassing this entire family," my mother hissed, her voice dripping with absolute venom. "Look at your sister. Just look at her." Chelsea was slumped in a plush leather chair at the far end of the room. She was dramatically clutching her slightly rounded belly, sobbing dry, tearless sobs into a designer tissue. She peered at me through her fingers, playing the helpless, fragile victim to absolute perfection. She had perfected this routine since childhood. The tears, the breathless gasps, the immediate weaponization of her current state. She is pregnant. She is highly stressed. She is supposed to be celebrating her dream home today. Patricia continued, her volume rising with every sentence, stepping closer, as if to physically push me out of the room. And instead, she is crying because you cannot handle basic administrative paperwork. You are treating this family like an afterthought. You always ruin everything, Riley. You always ruin her special moments. Do you enjoy being this useless? Richard stepped up next to his wife, his face a deep, dangerous shade of purple. He did not look at me like a father looking at a daughter. He did not look at me with an ounce of respect. He looked at me the way he looked at a disobedient servant who had just dropped a tray of expensive crystal. He looked at me like a massive, irritating inconvenience. "I do not want to hear your pathetic excuses," my father demanded, his voice cold and commanding. "I do not want your apologies. I want you to walk over to this table. I want you to open that laptop you are holding. I want you to log into the portal and push the money through. Fix it. Fix it right now, Riley. Fix it before Jamal loses this house. You work for this family, and right now you are failing at the one simple task we gave you." The sheer entitlement in the room was suffocating. The entitlement. The absolute blind entitlement. They were demanding millions of dollars from an account they did not control, screaming at the only person who had kept them afloat for half a decade. They believed they owned me. They believed my sole purpose on this earth was to silently fund their luxury, absorb their insults, and clean up their messes. They truly believed I was nothing but a low-level clerk. Jamal stepped into my personal space, trying to use his height to intimidate me. He leaned down, his face inches from mine, his breath smelling of stale coffee and mints. "Did you hear your father? Sit down, log in, and fix your banking glitch. If you cost me this house, I swear I will make sure the trust board fires you before the day is over. You will be out on the street with absolutely nothing." I looked at Jamal. I looked at Chelsea, still faking her tears to keep the attention squarely on her suffering. I looked at my parents, standing shoulder to shoulder in their unified hatred of me. I felt my heartbeat steady. I felt my breathing slow into a calm, measured rhythm. The panic in the room was entirely theirs. The panic was theirs, and the power was mine. I walked past Jamal, ignoring his looming presence entirely. I moved toward the head of the mahogany table, the seat my father had just vacated. I pulled out the heavy leather chair. I sat down very slowly, crossing my legs and resting my hands on my lap. I did not open my laptop. I did not apologize. I did not flinch. Instead, I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored blazer. I pulled out a single neatly folded piece of paper. I placed it flat against the cool marble surface of the table and slid it smoothly across the wood until it stopped right in front of Jamal. I looked up, meeting his furious gaze with a dead, icy stare. There was no glitch. I said, my voice barely above a whisper yet, carrying enough weight to silence the entire room. I canceled the wire. For a fraction of a second, the only sound in the conference room was the steady mechanical hum of the central air conditioning. Then the illusion of control shattered completely. Patricia let out a sound that was half gasp and half screech. Her manicured hands slammed onto the marble table so hard her heavy diamond rings clattered sharply against the polished stone. She sprang to her feet, her heavy wooden chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. "You did what?" Her voice was completely unrecognizable, stripped of its usual country club polish and replaced by raw, unhinged fury. "You malicious, bitter little girl. You did this on purpose." I remained perfectly still in my seat, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I did it because the family trust is not a personal piggy bank for mansions you cannot afford. Chelsea immediately wailed, burying her face dramatically in Jamal's shoulder. "She is trying to ruin my life, Jamal. She wants me to be homeless with the baby. She is trying to stress me out so I lose the pregnancy. I cannot breathe. I feel faint." Patricia rounded the table, marching toward me with her finger pointed like a weapon. "Do not you dare pretend this is about finances or trust administration, Riley. This is about you being consumed by petty, pathetic jealousy. You cannot stand the fact that Chelsea has a perfect marriage. You cannot stand that she is building a beautiful, flawless family, while you sit alone in a cold apartment with nothing but your spreadsheets and your miserable attitude. You have always envied her light, and you spend your entire pathetic life trying to drag her down to your level." I looked up at my mother, refusing to break eye contact, my voice dangerously calm. "Envied her light. You mean the light she bought with my money?" "You are completely unhinged," Patricia screamed, her face flushed a blotchy, uneven red. "You are just like you were at 18. Do you remember that? You are just like you were at 18 trying to ruin your sister's medical school acceptance dinner. You deliberately embarrassed us in front of the entire extended family because you were too bitter about having to go to community college. You threw a massive tantrum because you could never accept that Chelsea was simply destined for greater things, while you were meant to be average." Richard chimed in, stepping up aggressively beside his wife. "We tried to give you a good life, Riley, but you always chose to wallow in mediocrity. You chose community college, and now you want to punish your pregnant sister for achieving her dreams. You are a spiteful, disobedient disappointment." I stood up. I did not rush. I simply rose from my leather chair, matching my father's height, and leveled an icy gaze at them both. "I went to community college because you drained my accounts," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos in the room like shattered glass. "I went to community college because the day before tuition was due, I walked into the bank and discovered the $50,000 I had saved from working 3 jobs was completely gone. You stole my college fund. You forged my signature on the withdrawal slips and used every single penny to pay for Chelsea's first semester of medical school. And when I confronted you, you told me I needed to sacrifice for the greater good of the family." Chelsea stopped faking her tears for a split second, peering out from behind Jamal's tailored suit. "Well, I became a doctor. It was a family investment. You were just going to study something useless anyway." I turned my glare entirely on my sister, feeling zero sympathy for her manufactured distress. "You dropped out of medical school after 2 semesters because you thought the lab coats made you look washed out. You never became a doctor, you just became a professional parasite." "How dare you speak to your sister that way?" Richard bellowed, taking a menacing step toward me. "You are completely out of line, Riley. You will authorize that wire transfer this instant, or I will personally make sure you are removed from the family payroll. You are nothing without us." Jamal, who had been quietly absorbing the shifting power dynamics, suddenly let out a loud, mocking laugh. He gently pushed Chelsea aside and stepped right up to the edge of the marble table, shaking his head in amused disbelief. The tension in his shoulders had completely vanished, replaced by the arrogant, bulletproof swagger of a corporate lawyer who believed he had just figured out a magic trick. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out his smartphone, tapping the screen with a condescending smirk. "You almost had me for a second, Riley. I will admit you play a very good bluff." He leaned across the table, looking down at me with absolute unfiltered contempt. "You really think you can just press a button and cancel a federally regulated real estate transaction? You think you have the power to freeze accounts and halt escrows? You are delusional. You do not have the authority to cancel anything. You are just the administrative liaison for the trust. You process the paperwork. You do not make the big decisions." Jamal unlocked his phone and brought up his contact list, holding the screen up so I could see the number he was dialing. "I am calling the primary legal representatives for the estate right now. I am going to tell them that their little secretary went rogue, and then I am going to have them manually force the wire transfer through." Jamal tapped the screen of his phone with aggressive precision, his smug expression returning full force. "You actually thought you could pull a stunt like this and just walk away, Riley. You actually thought the managing board would let a glorified administrative assistant hijack a multi-million-dollar real estate transaction because of some petty childhood grudge." He held the phone up, waving it like a weapon. "I am calling the real trustee. I am calling the corporate entity that actually runs your grandfather's estate. I am going to report you for gross misconduct, breach of fiduciary duty, and tortious interference. Do you understand the words coming out of my mouth? I am going to have you fired before lunchtime. You will be blacklisted from handling so much as a petty cash drawer for the rest of your miserable life." Chelsea let out a loud theatrical sob from her leather chair. She rubbed her rounded belly with both hands, her face twisted into a mask of pure agony. "Jamal, do not just fire her. Sue her. She is doing this on purpose to stress me out. She knows the doctor said my blood pressure needs to stay low. She is actively trying to harm the baby. Handle her legally, Jamal. Throw her in jail. Take whatever miserable savings she has. She deserves to be ruined for putting our family through this nightmare." Patricia rushed to Chelsea's side, stroking her hair and cooing soft words of comfort. She cast venomous glares in my direction over her shoulder. "Look what you are doing to your sister. You are a monster, Riley. A cold, unfeeling monster. You have spent your entire life trying to punish Chelsea just because she is beautiful and successful." Richard did not offer comfort. He offered pure, unadulterated rage. My father stomped around the edge of the mahogany table, his heavy footsteps thudding against the floor. He stopped mere inches from where I sat, his chest heaving, his face a terrifying shade of crimson. He slammed his fist onto the marble surface right next to my folded hands. "You are going to open that laptop right now," he snarled, his voice dropping to a dangerous gravelly register. "You are going to log into the portal. You are going to input your little employee authorization code, and you are going to push that wire transfer through. You are not going to cost this family our reputation because you are throwing a childish tantrum." I did not flinch. I did not move my hands. I looked up at the man who had stolen my college fund, who had spent my entire life treating me like a disposable asset, and I felt absolutely nothing but cold, clinical resolve. "I do not take orders from you, Richard," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly flat. "I never have. You just assumed I did because you never bothered to read the unredacted trust documents." Richard's eyes bulged. He raised his hand slightly, his breathing ragged and shallow. "You ungrateful little brat. I am your father. You will do exactly as I say. You will fix this, or you will pack your bags and get out of our lives forever." Jamal stepped in, placing a restraining hand on Richard's shoulder. He was playing the role of the reasonable, level-headed attorney dealing with a hysterical subordinate. "Do not waste your breath on her, Richard. She is clearly having some sort of psychotic break. She wants to play games. We will let the adults handle this. She thinks because she has the login credentials for the escrow account that she holds the keys to the kingdom." Jamal turned his attention back to his phone. He scrolled through his contact list, his thumb hovering over the screen. "You are finished, Riley. I have the direct emergency number for the grandfather's trust administrator saved right here. This goes straight to the top of the corporate ladder. I am going to put them on speakerphone so you can hear them terminate your employment in real time. I want to watch your face when you realize you have lost everything. I sat perfectly still, my expression a mask of bored indifference. By all means, Jamal. Make the call. I would love to hear what the trust administrator has to say about this situation. He sneered, interpreting my calmness as a desperate bluff. He pressed the call button and slammed the phone down onto the center of the marble table. He hit the speaker icon. The loud rhythmic tone of a dialing phone echoed through the suffocating silence of the conference room. Patricia stopped cooing over Chelsea. Richard crossed his arms, a victorious sneer spreading across his face. Chelsea sat up slightly, wiping away her fake tears, eager to witness my absolute destruction. Jamal leaned forward, resting his knuckles on the table, practically vibrating with anticipated triumph. He was ready to deliver a blistering legal threat. He was ready to destroy the low-level number cruncher who had dared to stand in his way. I kept my eyes locked on Jamal. I did not break eye contact. I waited for the exact moment reality was going to crash down on them. Jamal dialed the direct emergency number for the grandfather's trust administrator. The loud electronic tone of the speakerphone filled the silent conference room. It bounced off the glass walls. It bounced off the mahogany table. It bounced off the sudden utter stillness of my family. Then a second sound joined it. A crisp melodic chime began vibrating from the depths of my charcoal designer handbag resting by my feet. It was perfectly synchronized with the speakerphone. The speakerphone buzzed. My handbag chimed. The speakerphone buzzed. My handbag chimed. Jamal's smug smile faltered. The arrogant curve of his mouth twitched, breaking his carefully practiced facade of corporate superiority. He glanced down at the table, then shifted his gaze toward the floor near my chair. His brow furrowed in deep, visible confusion. He reached out and stabbed the red button on his screen. The speakerphone disconnected. The conference room plunged into a heavy, suffocating silence. Simultaneously, the melodic chiming inside my handbag stopped. The silence was total. The silence was absolute. The silence was the sound of a paradigm shifting right beneath their feet. Richard blinked, looking between Jamal's phone and my bag. Patricia stopped comforting Chelsea, her manicured hand frozen mid-air. Chelsea let out a confused, wet hiccup, dropping her crumpled tissue onto her lap. They were struggling to process the impossible correlation. They were struggling to understand a truth that defied their entire worldview. "It is a routing error," Jamal muttered, his voice lacking its previous booming confidence. He sounded like a man desperately trying to convince himself. "The internal exchange system is crossing the digital lines. You forwarded the executive calls to your personal device. That is a massive breach of corporate protocol, Riley." He was grasping at straws. He was drowning in his own denial. He swallowed hard. His throat bobbed. His fingers hovered over his glowing screen. He did not ask for my explanation. He simply tapped the redial icon. The speakerphone flared to life once again. The dialing tone echoed loud and sharp, a harsh reminder of his arrogant threat. 1 second later, the crisp, melodic chime erupted from my handbag. The ringing filled the room. The ringing mocked their ignorance. The ringing signaled the end of their unchallenged reign. Jamal stared at my bag. He stared at the black leather. He stared at the polished brass hardware. He stared as if the bag itself had suddenly grown fangs. His chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow breaths. The corporate shark was abruptly choking on his own bait. I did not break eye contact with him. I reached down, my movement slow, deliberate, and entirely unbothered. I unclasped the brass latch. I slipped my hand inside the soft interior. I pulled out my personal smartphone. The screen was brilliantly illuminated, flashing brightly with an incoming call. The caller ID displayed in bold, unmistakable text. It read, "Jamal Blackwood, mobile." I placed my phone flat on the marble table right next to where his device was currently broadcasting its desperate plea to a faceless corporate entity. The two phones sat side by side, locked in a digital standoff. My father leaned forward, his face turning an unhealthy shade of chalky white. "What kind of trick is this?" he demanded, his voice entirely devoid of its previous thunder. "What did you do to the phone system, Riley? Stop playing these pathetic games and answer the question. Patricia stood up her chair, screeching against the floor. You hacked the directory. You hacked the trust directory because you are a spiteful, jealous little girl. You are going to jail for this. Do you hear me? Jamal is going to have you arrested for wire fraud and cyber crimes. I did not look at her. I did not look at Richard. I did not look at Chelsea, who was now staring at my phone with her mouth hanging open. I kept my eyes locked entirely on Jamal. I watched his mind race. I watched his legal brain desperately search for a loophole, a technicality, any possible explanation that did not involve him being completely and utterly outplayed. I watched the exact moment the realization hit him. The arrogant sneer melted away. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking hollow and terrified. I reached out with one manicured finger. I swiped the green accept icon on my screen. I tapped the speaker button. The feedback loop created a brief, sharp screech before settling into a hollow, echoing hiss that amplified my every breath. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the mahogany table. I clasped my hands together, projecting the very image of the unapproachable corporate entity they had feared and respected all these years. I looked dead into Jamal's widening eyes, the eyes of a man who just realized he had threatened the executioner with a guillotine. This is the managing trustee. I spoke clearly, my voice echoing simultaneously from my mouth and from the speaker of his own phone. How can I help you, Jamal? Jamal snatched his hand back from the phone, like the glass screen had suddenly turned to molten lava. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The arrogant, bulletproof corporate lawyer was completely paralyzed, his brain short-circuiting as the impossible reality crashed down on him. I reached over, tapped the red icon on my screen, and ended the call. The dial tone died, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in its wake. I am the trust, I said, my voice steady and cold. I am the sole managing trustee, the sole beneficiary of the grandfather's estate, and the only person in this room with the legal authority to authorize a single dime of family expenditures. Richard stumbled backward, his calves hitting the edge of a leather chair. He collapsed into it, staring at me as if a stranger had just peeled off my face. That is impossible, he wheezed. He left the estate to the family. You are just the administrative liaison. We saw the redacted summaries. You saw exactly what grandfather wanted you to see, I replied. I reached into my leather tote and pulled out a thick, legal-size manila envelope. I unspooled the red string closure and let a stack of heavy watermarked documents slide onto the polished mahogany table. I pushed them toward the center. These are the certified, unredacted trust documents. The original declarations fully executed and stamped by the probate court. Read them yourself, Jamal, if you can still remember how to practice law. Jamal hesitated, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for the top document. He flipped through the first few pages, his eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. With every second that passed, his face grew paler. He swallowed hard, a bead of sweat forming at his temple. Well, Richard demanded, his voice cracking with panic. What does it say? Jamal slowly lowered the papers. He did not look at Richard. He looked at me, a profound, terrified respect finally dawning in his eyes. She is telling the truth. The entire estate, the properties, the liquid assets, the investment portfolios. It all bypasses the parents and goes directly to a blind trust. The sole trustee and primary beneficiary is Riley. Chelsea let out a sharp, breathless gasp. But our allowances, the house, the trust pays for everything. No, Chelsea, I corrected her, my tone razor sharp. I pay for everything. I stood up, resting my hands on the table, leaning in to ensure every single word landed with devastating impact. Grandfather knew exactly who all of you were. He knew you, Richard, would squander his empire on terrible investments and vanity projects. He knew you, Patricia, would bleed the accounts dry maintaining your ridiculous socialite status. And he knew you, Chelsea, were a spoiled, entitled leech who would never work a day in her life if she could avoid it. He left you nothing. Zero. The air in the room grew incredibly thin. The collective horror radiating from my family was palpable. For 5 years, I continued pacing slowly behind my chair. You thought you were living off your rightful inheritance. You thought you were entitled to that money. But every single dollar that went into your accounts was discretionary charity. I authorized it. I approved the wire transfers for Patricia's exclusive country club memberships. I signed off on the lease payments for Richard's luxury cars. I personally funded the down payment for Chelsea's designer wedding and the ridiculous allowance she lives on right now. You have been living on my charity for 5 years while treating me like dirt on your shoes. That is a lie, Patricia screamed, her voice cracking as she lunged forward. She threw herself across the mahogany table, her manicured claws scraping wildly against the wood as she tried to snatch the documents from Jamal's hands. He pulled them back just in time, leaving Patricia grasping at empty air. "It is a forgery!" Patricia shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She faked it. She paid someone to print these. My father would never leave his money to a miserable, ungrateful failure like you. We are his family. We are his blood." "You are lying. I am not lying, Patricia. And you do not have to worry about taking my charity ever again." I stopped pacing and locked eyes with my mother. The sheer desperation in her gaze fed the icy fire in my chest. "Because I am done," I stated, my voice echoing with absolute finality. "The moment you left that vicious, hateful voicemail calling me a failure and demanding I fund Chelsea's mansion, I made a call of my own. I contacted the banking division. I legally dissolved your allowances, all of them. The credit cards tied to the trust are canceled. The automatic wire transfers are stopped. The escrow for Chelsea's new house is permanently closed. You have absolutely nothing left but the clothes on your backs." Patricia froze, the blood draining completely from her face. Richard gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles turning white. Chelsea let out a loud, genuine wail of terror. "You are cut off," I said, delivering the final blow. "And there is absolutely nothing you can do to stop me." Richard stared at me, the blood rushing back into his face until his skin turned a mottled, bruised purple. The veins in his neck bulged against the stiff collar of his dress shirt, pulsing with a terrifying, unhinged fury. He looked like a man ready to commit physical violence. "You stole it!" he bellowed, his voice echoing off the glass walls and rattling the heavy brass fixtures. "You stole our birthright. You manipulated an old, dying man into signing over what rightfully belongs to this family. I am going to contest this will. I am going to drag you through probate court until you are penniless. You are a thief, Riley. A common, deceitful thief." I did not raise my voice. I did not match his chaotic energy. I simply reached back into my leather tote and extracted a second, thinner folder. I tossed it onto the table. It slid perfectly across the polished wood, stopping inches from Richard's clenched fists. "I did not steal your birthright, Richard," I replied, my tone clinical and detached. "You spent it. Grandfather left you a direct, unrestricted inheritance of $4 million exactly 7 years ago. Do you want me to read the ledger aloud? Or do you remember where it went?" Richard opened his mouth, but I did not give him the chance to speak. "You lost $1.2 million on that disastrous restaurant franchise investment you refused to research. You spent $800,000 bailing out your country club buddies from their failed real estate scam. Patricia spent $400,000 on personal shoppers, exclusive retreats, and maintaining a lifestyle she had not earned. You blew through another $500,000 on luxury cars, first-class vacations, and endless renovations to a house that was already perfect. By the time grandfather passed away, your actual inheritance was completely gone. You were functionally bankrupt. The only reason you have not been living on the street for the last 5 years is because grandfather set up the blind trust and made me the gatekeeper to keep you from starving. You are terrible with money, and he knew it." Chelsea let out a piercing, guttural shriek. She scrambled out of her leather chair, her hands clutching her head. Her perfectly styled hair fell into her face, her carefully constructed country club persona disintegrating into pure, unadulterated panic. "The house," she gasped, her eyes wide with terror as she looked at her husband. "Jamal, the escrow on the mansion. The down payment was supposed to clear today. If the wire does not go through, we lose the deposit. We lose the house entirely. We have already ordered the custom imported furniture. We have already sent out the change of address cards to everyone in our social circle. I cannot be seen backing out of a purchase like this." She grabbed Jamal by the lapels of his tailored suit, shaking him frantically. "Do something, Jamal. You are a lawyer. You are supposed to be the smartest person in the room. Fix this. Sue her. Injunction her. I cannot lose that house. I will not go back to living in a condo like a peasant. Make her sign the transfer. Jamal forcefully pried Chelsea's hands off his suit jacket, pushing her back slightly. His jaw clenched so tightly a muscle ticked violently near his ear. The absolute humiliation of being completely outplayed by the woman he had just spent 20 minutes degrading was radiating from him in waves. He straightened his tie, taking a slow, deep breath to rein in his fractured ego. He smoothed down his lapels, running his hands over the expensive fabric, as if wiping away the defeat. When he looked at me again, the mocking arrogance was gone entirely. In its place was a dark, menacing hostility. He stepped away from his hysterical wife and walked slowly toward my end of the table. He placed his hands flat on the marble surface, leaning in close, invading my personal space with calculated intimidation. His voice dropped to a cold, lethal whisper stripped of all emotion and replaced by pure legalistic malice. "You think you are incredibly clever, Riley," Jamal said, his dark eyes locked onto mine like a predator assessing prey. "You think you have maneuvered us into a corner. You think cutting the purse strings makes you the undisputed king of the board. But you made a fundamental miscalculation. You let your petty emotional need for a dramatic reveal blind you to the actual legal reality of your parents' financial structure." I held his gaze, refusing to lean back, refusing to show a single ounce of intimidation. "What are you talking about, Jamal?" A cruel, terrifying smile slowly spread across his face. He leaned in even closer until I could smell the sharp, expensive mint of his breath. "You think you have won," he whispered, savoring every single syllable. "You forgot one thing. The trust legally guaranteed Richard and Patricia's current house. We leveraged that house last week. We used it as collateral for a $2 million commercial loan to expand my law firm. If you cut the funds today, the monthly payments immediately default. Cut the funds, Riley and the bank forecloses on your parents. You will make them homeless by Friday." Jamal leaned back, letting the gravity of his threat settle over the room. He adjusted his cuffs, the panic from moments ago completely replaced by the arrogant swagger of a man who believed he held the ultimate trump card. He looked at Richard and Patricia, who were visibly trembling, and then fixed his dark, condescending gaze on me. "You see, Riley, while you were busy playing accountant, I was actually managing this family's future," Jamal sneered. "Richard came to me complaining about liquidity. I provided a solution. A completely legal, highly leveraged solution. We closed the deal last week. A $2 million commercial line of credit to expand my practice into a second downtown office. The bank required substantial collateral. Since Richard and Patricia technically hold the deed to the Fairfield estate, and the trust is legally obligated to cover their primary residence expenses, I simply advised them to sign the secondary mortgage documents." Patricia gasped, clutching her chest as she turned to her husband. "Richard, you let him put a lien on our house." Richard stammered, a fresh sheen of sweat breaking out across his forehead. "Jamal said it was a formality. He said the trust allowances would automatically cover the balloon payments. He told me it was free money." Jamal let out a short, dismissive laugh. "It was free money, Richard, until your ungrateful daughter decided to go rogue." He turned his attention back to me, stepping right up to the edge of the table and pointing an accusatory finger at my face. "You might control the trust accounts, Riley, but I know the law. I leveraged an underutilized asset, an asset the trust is legally bound to protect. I structured that loan specifically so the massive monthly balloon payments are tied directly to the routing numbers you just dissolved. If you do not reinstate those allowances immediately, the payments bounce. The commercial loan goes into immediate default." He paced a few steps, savoring his perceived victory. "The bank will seize the Fairfield estate. Your parents will be foreclosed on and evicted. And the best part, I made sure your name is listed as the primary fiduciary contact. If this goes south, the public record will show that you, Riley, deliberately let your own parents lose their home. The society pages will eat you alive. Your reputation in the financial sector will be radioactive. The probate court will strip you of your title for breaching your fiduciary duty, and you will be personally liable for the damages. You will be known as the vindictive daughter who threw her elderly parents onto the street over a petty grudge. Chelsea suddenly found her voice again, a malicious, triumphant grin spreading across her tear-stained face. She sat up straight, her previous panic completely vanishing. You are trapped, Riley. Jamal outsmarted you. You are not as smart as you think you are. Turn the money back on right now, or you ruin your own life along with Mom and Dad's. Richard's chest puffed out slightly, catching onto Jamal's logic like a drowning man grabbing a life preserver. He is right, Riley. You have a legal obligation to protect the house. You have to pay the loan. You cannot touch us. You have to authorize the transfers. I looked at Chelsea. I looked at my father, who was desperately trying to reclaim his authority. Finally, I looked at Jamal. I did not scream. I did not panic. I did not scramble for my laptop to reverse the cancellations. I laughed. It was not a loud laugh, but it was genuine. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated amusement echoing off the cold glass walls of the conference room. Jamal frowned, his smug expression faltering once again. The muscle in his jaw twitched violently. What is so funny? You are Jamal, I replied, shaking my head slowly. You are so incredibly blinded by your own arrogance that you never bother to look past the surface of any contract you sign. You rely on assumptions and unredacted summaries. You think you cornered me with a secondary mortgage on the Fairfield estate. You think you found a legal loophole to force my hand. I reached down, bypassing the laptop, and opened the heavy brass latch of my leather briefcase. My fingers brushed past my personal phone and gripped the thick, rigid edge of a heavy legal dossier. I pulled it out and dropped it onto the mahogany table. It hit the wood with a heavy, authoritative thud. I looked dead into Jamal's eyes, watching the first flicker of genuine doubt cross his face. The folder was bound in thick manila stock, but what immediately caught Jamal's eye was the bold crimson ink stamped diagonally across the front cover. It read in unmistakable block letters, "Property Deed Transfer and Recording." Jamal froze. The confident, predatory sneer wiped from his face as if it had never been there. He stared at the red ink. He stared at it as if it were a venomous snake coiled on the polished wood. "Open it, Jamal," I instructed, my voice dropping to a harsh, commanding level. "Open the folder. Read the document. Read the fine print of your flawless legal strategy." He did not move. His hands remained planted on the table, the knuckles turning white. He knew. Deep down in the dark, arrogant core of his ego, he knew something was fatally wrong. "Read it," I snapped. Slowly, his trembling fingers reached out. He flipped open the heavy cover. He stared at the first page, his eyes darting back and forth across the dense legal text. He read the property description. He read the address of the Fairfield estate. He read the date of the transfer. Then his eyes hit the section detailing the grantor and the grantee. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him a sickening ashen gray. His breathing turned shallow and rapid. A single bead of sweat broke loose from his hairline and tracked down the side of his cheek. "What does it say?" Chelsea demanded, her voice rising in a panicked crescendo. "What is it? Tell me what it says." Jamal could not speak. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He just kept staring at the paper, reading the same lines over and over again, trapped in a relentless loop of disbelief. "Since the brilliant corporate lawyer has suddenly lost his ability to speak, I will explain it to all of you," I said, leaning back in my chair and folding my hands. I looked at my father. Richard was sinking lower into his seat, his eyes fixed firmly on the floor. He could not look at me. He could not look at his son-in-law. He could not look at his wife. The crushing weight of his own secret failure was finally suffocating him. 4 years ago, I began ensuring my voice echoed clearly through the silent room. 4 years ago, Richard and Patricia were completely, hopelessly underwater. They had taken out secret loans to cover their lavish lifestyle. They had borrowed against their cars. They had borrowed against their country club equity. They were weeks away from personal bankruptcy. The bank was preparing to foreclose on the Fairfield estate and throw them out onto the street. They were ruined, completely ruined. Patricia gasped, turning to her husband. Richard, what is she talking about? You told me we just refinanced. You told me it was a simple restructuring of our assets. He lied to you, Patricia, I stated flatly. He lied to you because he is a coward. He came to me begging for a bailout. He begged me to save his reputation. He begged me to keep his precious social standing intact. And I did. I stepped in and I saved him, but I did not refinance the house. I stood up, walking slowly around the table, letting the rhythm of my footsteps amplify the tension in the room. I bought the house. I bought the debt. I bought the deed. I used my own private limited liability company to purchase the Fairfield estate in its entirety. The trust does not own that property. Richard and Patricia do not own that property. They own nothing. They control nothing. They have absolutely no equity in that estate. I stopped right behind Jamal, leaning down so my voice was right next to his ear. For 4 years they have been renters. They are tenants. They have always been tenants. Just tenants living in a house owned entirely by my LLC. The silence in the conference room was absolute. It was the deafening silence of total, inescapable destruction. Chelsea looked like she was going to be sick. Patricia was quietly weeping into her hands. Richard remained entirely motionless, a hollow shell of a man. But it was Jamal who looked the most destroyed. The bulletproof lawyer was shaking. The man who thought he had outsmarted everyone had just walked willingly into a financial slaughterhouse. I walked back to my seat, staring directly into Jamal's terrified eyes. I let the silence stretch, building the psychological tension, until it felt like the glass walls of the room might shatter. "You are so smart, Jamal," I whispered softly. "So incredibly smart. But you never looked deep enough. You saw the house. You saw the luxury. You saw the gates and the gardens and the address. But you did not see the truth." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, delivering the final, fatal blow. "If my LLC owns the house, how exactly did Richard and Patricia use it as collateral for your $2 million commercial loan?" Jamal did not move. He did not breathe. The confident, predatory sneer that had defined his entire existence simply melted off his bone structure. As a corporate lawyer, his brain was trained to instantly calculate liability, and right now the math was catastrophic. The color completely drained from his face, replaced by a sickly, translucent gray. I let the question hang in the freezing air. If my LLC owns the house, how exactly did Richard and Patricia use it as collateral? Jamal turned his head with agonizing slowness. He looked at his father-in-law. Richard was gripping the edge of the mahogany table so hard his knuckles looked ready to shatter. He was sweating profusely, his breath coming in shallow, frantic hitches. "Richard," Jamal said, his voice dropping into a terrifyingly calm, deadpan register. "Richard, look at me. What did you give the commercial loan officers last week? What documents did you physically sign and submit to the underwriters?" Richard swallowed hard. He looked at Patricia, who was staring at him in mute horror, and then at Chelsea, who was hyperventilating into her hands. "I had to." Richard wheezed, his voice trembling as he backed away from the table. "You needed the money for the firm expansion, Jamal. Chelsea said you were going to leave her if you did not get the capital. She was crying every night. She said she could not be married to a failure. The bank demanded a primary residence as collateral for a loan that size. They needed the physical deed. They needed proof of equity." "What did you give them?" Jamal roared, slamming his open palms against the marble. The sudden explosion of sound made Chelsea scream, and Patricia jump out of her chair. "What deed did you give them, Richard?" "I made one." Richard blurted out the confession, tearing out of his throat like a physical weight. "I used the old title from before Riley bailed us out. I had my assistant alter the dates. I forged the county clerk stamps. I mocked up a clean deed showing Patricia and I owned the estate free and clear. It was just a formality." The air was instantly sucked out of the room. Jamal stumbled backward, hitting the glass wall behind him. His eyes were wide, darting frantically around the room, as if searching for an exit that did not exist. His expensive suit suddenly looked like a straitjacket. "You forged a property deed!" Jamal choked out, gripping his own hair. You submitted forged legal documents to a federally insured bank to secure a $2 million commercial loan. It was not supposed to matter. Richard pleaded, stepping toward Jamal with his hands raised in supplication. Riley pays all the bills. The trust pays everything. I figured the bank would issue the loan, the trust would automatically pay the monthly balloon payments, and the bank would never have a reason to look closely at the deed. It was foolproof. It was a bridge loan. We were going to pay it back quietly before anyone noticed. You absolute staggering idiot, Jamal screamed, his professional veneer shattering completely. He grabbed Richard by the collar of his dress shirt, hauling the older man forward. Do you have any idea what you have done? You did not just secure a loan. You funded my law firm with fraudulent capital. You tied my business, my name, my entire legal career to a forged document. If the bank runs an audit, if the payments default, and they try to seize a house you do not own, they will trace the money straight to my firm's operating account. Jamal shoved Richard away. Richard stumbled and fell hard against the leather chairs, knocking one over with a loud crash. I am ruined, Jamal gasped, pacing frantically. My license, my practice. The Bar Association will disbar me before the day is over. I will go to prison. You have sent me to prison, you pathetic old man. Chelsea fell to her knees, grabbing Jamal's pants leg. No, Jamal, please. Riley will fix it. Riley has to fix it. She can pay the loan off right now. She has the money. Riley, tell him you will pay it. I watched them tear each other apart. The unbreakable family unit completely destroyed by their own greed in less than 5 minutes. I slowly closed my leather folder, the loud snap of the brass latch cutting through their hysterical sobbing. I am not paying off anything. I stated, my voice slicing through the chaos with absolute freezing clarity. Jamal froze. He looked at me, a wild-cornered animal realization dawning in his eyes. You committed title fraud and mortgage fraud, Richard, I said, leaning forward and resting my forearms on the table. That is a federal felony. It carries a mandatory minimum sentence. And Jamal... I shifted my gaze to the brilliant lawyer currently hyperventilating against the glass. As the direct beneficiary of those fraudulent funds and the legal counsel who advised them to leverage the property in the first place, you are an accessory. Jamal stared at me, the word accessory echoing in the dead silence of the room. Then something inside his perfectly manicured exterior snapped. He lunged away from the glass wall, crossing the distance in 3 long strides, and grabbed Richard by the lapels of his custom suit. He slammed the older man hard against the edge of the mahogany table, rattling the heavy brass light fixtures overhead. You stupid, arrogant old fool, Jamal roared, spittle flying from his lips. Do you have any idea what you have actually done? Mortgage fraud, wire fraud, forgery. You dragged my law firm into a federal racketeering conspiracy. I am a senior partner, Richard. I have a pristine record. When the federal investigators audit that commercial loan, they will see my signature on the intake forms. They will see the money sitting in my operating account. They will strip my law license, and they will put me in a federal penitentiary for a decade. Patricia rushed forward, her manicured hands clawing frantically at Jamal's arms, trying desperately to pry him off her husband. Let him go, Jamal, she shrieked, her voice shrill with blind panic. He was only trying to help you. We did this for your firm. We did this so you and Chelsea could have the life you deserve. Richard is your family. You cannot speak to him like this. You cannot treat us like criminals. Chelsea did not step in to help her mother. Instead, her face twisted into an ugly, unrecognizable mask of pure hatred. She rounded on Patricia, her voice a piercing wail that cut through the physical struggle. Help us, Mom. You did this to help us. Chelsea screamed, stepping closer to her mother with her fists clenched. You committed a federal crime to help us. No, you did this because you are a pathetic, broke fraud who could not stand the thought of losing your country club status. You put my husband in jeopardy. You jeopardized my entire future. If Jamal goes to prison, what happens to me? I lose my allowance. I lose the new mansion. All of my friends will read about this in the papers. You disgusting, selfish people. You have destroyed my life. Patricia stared at her favored daughter, tears carving dark tracks of mascara down her pale cheeks. She looked completely broken by the betrayal, unable to comprehend that the child she had spoiled for 30 years was turning on her so viciously. "But I did it for you," Patricia sobbed, reaching a shaking hand toward Chelsea. "Do not touch me," Chelsea hissed, slapping her mother's hand away. "You are a criminal. You are going to jail." Richard was struggling to breathe, gasping as Jamal shook him again. "Jamal, listen to me." Richard pleaded, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. "The bank will never look closely as long as the payment's clear. It is a bridge loan. We just need to make the monthly minimums." "You forged a federal document," Jamal screamed, throwing Richard backward into his chair. "It does not matter if the payment's clear. The deed is fake. The collateral does not exist. The entire foundation of the loan is a lie." The room devolved into absolute madness. They were all shouting over each other, their voices echoing in a chaotic, desperate frenzy. Chelsea threw a heavy crystal water glass across the room. It shattered against the wall, raining sharp shards onto the expensive carpet. Patricia was weeping hysterically, begging Richard to do something to fix the mess he had created. Richard just sat there, clutching his chest, looking like a man staring down the barrel of a loaded gun. I simply sat back in my leather chair, crossing my legs, and watching the spectacle unfold. For my entire life, they had presented a united, flawless front to the world. They had banded together to tear me down, to make me feel small, crazy, and unworthy. Now the mask was entirely gone. The perfect family was cannibalizing itself in real time, tearing out each other's throats to save their own skins. The vindication was sweet, cold, and absolute. Suddenly, Jamal stopped pacing. He stared at the shattered glass on the floor, his breathing ragged and uneven. He realized that screaming at Richard would not save his license or his freedom. The law did not care about family drama. The law only cared about the paper trail. He turned around. His chest was heaving, his suit jacket wrinkled and ruined. He looked at me, his eyes wild with terror and naked desperation. All the mockery, all the arrogant superiority had completely vanished. He walked back to my side of the table and slammed his hands down, leaning over the documents. "Riley, please," Jamal begged, his voice cracking with raw panic. "You have to fix this. You control the trust accounts. You have liquid capital. If you wire $2 million directly to the bank right now today, we can pay off the commercial loan in full before the underwriter runs the quarterly audit. They will close the file. No one will ever look at the forged deed. You have to pay them, Riley." I stared at his trembling hands pressing into the mahogany wood. The sheer audacity of his request hung in the air. $2 million. He was asking me for $2 million to cover up a federal crime as casually as if he were asking to borrow a pen. Jamal saw my silence and mistook it for hesitation. He rounded the table, invading my personal space, his breath reeking of stale coffee and blind panic. He dropped his voice into a hushed, pleading register, the exact tone he probably used to manipulate junior associates. "Riley, you have to think about the bigger picture here," Jamal urged, his eyes wide and bloodshot. "This is not just about me. This is about your sister. This is about family. Chelsea is pregnant. She is carrying your nephew." Chelsea, catching onto his strategy, immediately changed her entire demeanor. The vicious, screaming woman from 2 minutes ago vanished. She placed a protective hand over her slightly rounded stomach and looked at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Please, Riley," Chelsea whimpered, taking a step toward me. "I know we have had our differences. I know I have not always been the best sister to you, but I am begging you. Do not let my baby grow up without a father. Do not let my child be born while his dad is sitting in a federal prison cell. You have the money. I know your company is doing incredible numbers. $2 million is nothing to you now. Just clear the debt. Save our family." I looked from Chelsea's practiced tears to Jamal's sweating forehead. It was a masterful performance. If I were the same naive, desperate girl I was 5 years ago, the one who begged them for a small loan to keep my startup afloat, I might have caved. I remembered that day perfectly. I had sat in this exact room presenting my business plan, asking for a fraction of what they spent on their annual country club memberships. Jamal had laughed in my face. He had called my company a cute little hobby and told me to get a real job before I embarrassed the family name. Chelsea had rolled her eyes and complained that my presentation was cutting into her spa appointment. They did not care about family then. They only cared about family now because I was holding the checkbook. I did not say a word. I simply stood up. The leather of my chair creaked loudly in the sudden tense silence of the room. I reached for my briefcase resting on the table. It was a custom Italian leather piece bought with the profits from my first major corporate acquisition. I opened it and began gathering my files. "Riley, what are you doing?" Jamal asked, his voice rising in panic. "I am talking to you. We are talking about my freedom. We are talking about your nephew." I picked up my pen, a solid gold Mont Blanc, and slid it meticulously into its designated loop. I gathered the financial summaries Richard had so foolishly handed me earlier and tapped the edges against the table to align them perfectly. My movements were slow, deliberate, and entirely devoid of emotion. "Riley, answer me!" Chelsea screamed, dropping the fragile mother act. Her true colors bled right back to the surface. "You selfish witch! We are your family! You owe us!" I closed the briefcase. The twin brass locks snapped shut with two sharp echoing clicks that sounded like gunshots in the quiet room. Patricia let out a strangled gasp, stumbling forward. She reached out with shaking hands, her heavy diamond rings clinking together as she hovered near my arm, too afraid to actually touch me. "Riley," she sobbed, her voice cracking, "please, think about what you are doing. If you walk out that door without paying this off, the scandal will destroy us. The business will fold. We will lose the house. Your father will not survive the stress of a trial. Look at him." I glanced at Richard. He was pale and clammy, clutching his chest, staring at me with the same expectation of compliance he had demanded my entire life. He still expected me to fold. He still believed that because he was the patriarch, I would ultimately absorb the consequences of his failure. "You created this scandal, Patricia," I said, my voice as cold as ice. "You signed as a witness on a fake deed. You helped forge documents to maintain an illusion of wealth you no longer possess. You made these choices. I am simply refusing to pay for them." Jamal stepped in front of the door, physically blocking my exit. His chest heaved. The veins in his neck were pulsing visibly against his collar. "You cannot leave," he growled, the begging completely replaced by cornered aggression. "You are not walking out of here until this is resolved. You have the money, Riley. You are going to transfer the funds to my operating account right now, or I swear to God. Or you will do what Jamal," I interrupted, stepping right up to him. I did not flinch. I did not shrink back. I looked him dead in the eye, watching the realization dawn on him that he had absolutely no power over me anymore. "Are you going to threaten me? Are you going to bully me into aiding and abetting a federal crime? Because I promise you that will only add witness intimidation to your rapidly growing list of felony charges." Jamal swallowed hard, taking a half step back. His aggression crumbled, leaving only the pathetic reality of his situation. "Riley, please," he whispered, his eyes darting to the floor. "I will lose my license. I will lose everything." I pulled back the cuff of my silk blouse and glanced down. The diamonds on the bezel of my luxury watch caught the overhead light, throwing fractured rainbows across the mahogany table. I took my time reading the dial, letting their panic stew for a few more agonizing seconds. I would love to help Jamal. But about 30 minutes ago, I forwarded the forged loan documents to the bank's fraud department and the IRS. For a single suspended second, the words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Then the silence shattered. Absolute pandemonium erupted inside the pristine conference room. Jamal let out a guttural, animalistic sound, stumbling backward as if I had driven a physical blade into his chest. He hit the glass wall and slid down, his hands tearing at his perfectly styled hair. Richard slumped forward, his face hitting the mahogany table with a sickening thud, his breath coming in shallow, wheezing gasps that nobody bothered to check on. Chelsea shrieked a high-pitched, ear-piercing wail of pure terror, pressing her hands over her ears as if she could physically block out the reality of her impending ruin. But it was Patricia who broke completely. The aristocratic, untouchable matriarch of the family crumbled. Her knees gave out. She collapsed onto the floor, crawling across the expensive carpet toward me. She lunged, her manicured hands gripping the fabric of my skirt with desperate bruising force. Riley, no. Patricia sobbed, her voice unrecognizable, choked with hysterics and running makeup. You cannot do this. You did not do this. Tell me you are lying. Please, God, tell me you are just trying to scare us. We are your family. I am your mother. You cannot send your own flesh and blood to prison. I looked down at her. The woman who had spent my entire life scrutinizing my every flaw, mocking my career, and elevating Chelsea to the status of a living deity, was now groveling at my feet, weeping uncontrollably. The pride, the arrogance, the relentless superiority were completely eradicated. She was nothing but a terrified, broken shell. You did this to yourself, Patricia, I said, my voice eerily calm amidst the screaming. You signed the fake deed. You authorized the wire transfers. You committed the fraud. I simply handed the bank the truth. Riley listened to me. Patricia begged, her tears soaking into the hem of my skirt. I know you are angry. I know you are hurt about the voicemail I left you last week. But you have to understand, I was just stressed. The gala was coming up, and Richard was hiding the financial troubles from me, and I took it out on you. You know how my nerves get when I am under pressure. I did not mean any of the horrible things I said. I love you, Riley. You are my daughter. You know I have always loved you. The sheer audacity of her gaslighting was breathtaking. Even now, facing federal indictments, she was trying to rewrite history. She was trying to spin decades of deliberate emotional abuse and financial manipulation into a momentary lapse in judgment caused by stress. She expected me to fold, to revert to the desperate approval-seeking scapegoat I used to be. I did not fold. I stepped back, physically breaking her grip on my clothing. Patricia fell forward, her hands hitting the floor as I removed myself from her reach. Do not ever insult my intelligence again, I said, staring down at her. You were not stressed. You were vicious. You called me a pathetic failure because you needed a punching bag to make yourself feel superior. You have always used me to elevate Chelsea. You chose this bed, Patricia. Now you get to lie in it. Chelsea, seeing her mother rejected, turned her fury on Jamal. Do something, she screamed, kicking his leg as he sat paralyzed against the glass wall. Call someone. Call the bank president. Fix this right now or I am divorcing you today. Jamal did not answer. He was staring blankly at the ceiling, trapped in a catatonic state of shock. He was calculating the years he would serve, the forfeiture of his assets, the permanent destruction of his reputation. Richard finally managed to lift his head from the table. His skin was gray and a thin line of drool hung from his chin. Riley, he rasped, his voice trembling. They will seize everything. The house, the cars, my retirement accounts. We will have absolutely nothing left. Where are we supposed to go? How are we supposed to live? That sounds like a problem for your public defender to figure out, I replied, picking up my briefcase. My posture was straight, my conscience clear. For 30 years they had demanded I shrink myself to fit their narrative. Today, I broke the mold entirely. I turned toward the door, ready to leave them to the federal nightmare they had engineered. My hand was on the brass handle when a sharp, jarring sound cut through the weeping and the shouting. It was Jamal's cell phone vibrating violently against the polished wood of the conference table. The caller ID flashed in bright, unforgiving letters. It was Arthur Vance, the senior managing partner of Jamal's law firm, the man who controlled Jamal's career. Jamal stared at the ringing phone like it was a live grenade. He scrambled up from the floor, his hands shaking so violently he nearly dropped the device twice before managing to accept the call and press it to his ear. Arthur, Jamal said, his voice cracking. The room went dead silent. Patricia stopped sobbing. Chelsea stopped screaming. They all watched Jamal, waiting for a lifeline. Instead, Jamal's face went entirely slack. His eyes widened in absolute, unadulterated horror. What do you mean the operational accounts are frozen? Jamal whispered, his voice echoing in the vast room. What do you mean federal agents are in the lobby? Jamal lowered the phone slowly. He looked at Richard, then at Chelsea, and finally at me. The bank just froze all of our firm's accounts. Jamal said, his voice hollow and defeated. The IRS is executing a search warrant on my office right now. The federal fraud investigation has officially begun. The heavy silence following Jamal's announcement was broken by a sharp plastic clatter. His cell phone slipped from his trembling fingers, bouncing across the mahogany table and landing on the floor. He stared at his empty hands. His entire identity, his senior partnership, his country club memberships, his untouchable status. Everything evaporated in a matter of seconds. Then the shock morphed into a blind, explosive rage. Jamal let out a guttural roar, vaulting over the scattered documents. He tackled Richard, sending both of them crashing into the glass wall. The impact shuddered through the room, bowing the heavy glass outward. Patricia screamed, scrambling backward on her hands and knees as Jamal pinned the older man by the throat. "You did this," Jamal bellowed, his face inches from Richard's terrified eyes. "You gave me that forged deed. You told me the collateral was verified. You used me to launder your fake equity, and now I am going to lose my law license. I am going to a federal penitentiary because you are a pathetic, bankrupt fraud." Richard choked, clawing weakly at Jamal's wrists. His tailored suit jacket bunched up around his ears. "I had no choice," Richard gasped, his face turning a dangerous shade of plum. "We were drowning. You were demanding the capital for the down payment." "I am a corporate lawyer," Jamal screamed, shaking him violently against the glass. "I am an officer of the court. You made me an accessory to wire fraud. I am going to lose everything because you wanted to pretend you were still rich." Before Patricia could intervene, the heavy oak doors of the conference room swung open with a resounding bang. Two burly security guards stepped inside, their hands resting cautiously on their utility belts. Behind them stood Marcus Vance, the title company branch manager. Marcus adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, his eyes sweeping over the shattered crystal water glass on the carpet, the weeping matriarch on the floor, and the two men physically brawling against his expensive corporate real estate. "Gentlemen," Marcus said, his voice radiating cold professional authority. "Release him immediately or I am calling the police." Jamal froze. The threat of law enforcement was the ultimate cold water. He slowly released his grip on Richard's throat, stepping back with his hands raised in surrender. He straightened his ruined suit jacket, trying and completely failing to salvage a shred of his corporate dignity. Richard slumped against the wall, coughing violently while Patricia hovered over him, weeping into her hands. "I apologize for the disturbance," Marcus Jamal panted, trying to force his voice into its usual smooth cadence, wiping sweat from his forehead. "It is simply a minor family disagreement. We will proceed with the closing on the property now." Marcus did not smile. He looked at Jamal with a mixture of pity and absolute disdain. He looked down at the thick manila folder in his hands. "There will be no closing today," Jamal Marcus stated, stepping further into the room. "In fact, there will be no closing at all." Chelsea snapped to attention, her tear-stained face suddenly whipping toward the manager. "What do you mean there is no closing?" Chelsea demanded, her voice shrill and frantic. "That is my house. We signed the preliminary paperwork last week. We are just here to transfer the final funds." "That is exactly the issue," Mrs. Sterling, Marcus replied, adjusting his glasses again. 10 minutes ago, the seller's agent contacted my office. Your holding accounts have been frozen. The earnest money deposit you wired yesterday was flagged and reversed by the Federal Fraud Department. You have failed to produce the necessary capital." "No." Chelsea gasped, shaking her head frantically side to side. "No, that is a mistake. Run the numbers again. Check the wire transfers." "There is no mistake," Marcus said, closing the folder with a definitive snap. "The seller has officially canceled the contract due to lack of funds. The mansion is going back on the market this afternoon. I am going to have to ask you all to vacate the premises immediately." Marcus gestured to the security guards who stepped further into the room, their presence a silent, immovable command. Chelsea stood entirely paralyzed. The perfectly constructed illusion of her life shattered into microscopic pieces right in front of her eyes. She looked at her father, who was bankrupt and facing federal indictment. She looked at her mother, who was sobbing on the floor in ruined designer clothes. She looked at her husband, who was about to be disbarred and prosecuted by the IRS. The mansion, the high society status, The endless stream of luxury, it was all gone. Then her eyes locked onto me. I was standing quietly by the door, briefcase in hand, entirely untouched by the fallout. My company was thriving. My accounts were secure. My freedom was guaranteed. A terrifying, desperate, manic energy overtook Chelsea. She marched across the room, ignoring the security guards, ignoring her gasping husband, and stopped directly in front of me. She squared her shoulders, attempting to summon the exact same golden child authority she had wielded since childhood. "Riley," Chelsea commanded, holding her hand out, palm up. "Give it to me." I stared at her extended hand, genuinely fascinated by the sheer depth of her delusion. "Give you what, Chelsea?" "The money." Chelsea snapped, her voice vibrating with a terrifying entitlement. "You have it. Your company just closed that massive tech deal. I need $1.5 million for the mansion. If you wire it to the seller directly, they will reinstate the contract." "You want me to buy you a mansion?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. "You owe it to me," Chelsea shrieked, stomping her foot on the carpet like a toddler denied a toy. "This is your fault. If you had just paid off Dad's commercial loan like he asked, none of this would have happened. Jamal's accounts would not be frozen. You ruined my life, Riley. You ruined everything. Now fix it. Give me the $1.5 million right now. It is your sisterly duty to protect this family." Sisterly duty. I repeated the phrase slowly, letting the sheer absurdity of it echo in the shattered quiet of the conference room. I looked at Chelsea, really looked at her. Her designer dress was wrinkled. Her makeup was smudged from her fake tears, and her eyes were wide with a feral, grasping panic. She was 35 years old, but in that moment, she looked exactly like the spoiled 7-year-old who used to steal my allowance and convince our parents I had lost it. I took a slow, deliberate step toward her. Chelsea instinctively took a half step back, her false bravado faltering against the absolute ice in my demeanor. "You want to talk to me about sisterly duty?" I asked, dropping my voice to a dangerous, deadly quiet register. "Let us talk about sisterly duty. Let us talk about how you spent the last 3 decades expertly manipulating every single person in this room to serve your pathological need for attention and money. You have never been a sister to me, Chelsea. You have been a parasite." Chelsea gasped, her hand flying to her chest in a gesture of manufactured offense. "How dare you?" she sputtered. I held up a hand, silencing her instantly. "I am speaking. You are going to listen. For 35 years, you made it your full-time job to ensure I remain the family scapegoat. When I won the regional science fair in middle school, you faked a panic attack so our parents would miss the awards ceremony to take you to the emergency room. When I got accepted into my top choice university, you maxed out Patricia's credit card the very same week, forcing Richard to tell me they could no longer help with my tuition. You hijacked my achievements, you sabotaged my milestones, and you poisoned our parents against me, simply because you could not stand sharing the spotlight." Chelsea's mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish. She looked frantically toward Patricia, but our mother was still weeping quietly on the floor, incapable of coming to her golden child's defense. "And then there is grandfather." I continued, taking another step forward, forcing Chelsea to back up until her shoulder hit the glass wall next to her catatonic husband. "You love talking about family loyalty. You want sisterly duty. Like when you took credit for caring for grandfather during his final months. You told the entire extended family you were his primary caregiver. You cried at his funeral about how exhausting it was to hold his hand every single night." I leaned in close, ensuring every word landed with maximum impact. "But you were never there. I was the one sleeping in the rigid plastic hospital chair for 60 days straight. I was the one feeding him ice chips and listening to him struggle to breathe. You were on a wine tasting tour in Napa Valley financed by his credit card. You flew back just in time to collect your inheritance and pose for the sympathy photos, looking perfectly tragic in custom black silk. You do not want a sister Chelsea. You want an ATM. You want a shield to absorb the consequences of your greed, and the ATM is permanently broken." The air in the room felt impossibly heavy. The title manager, Marcus, stood silently by the door with his security guards professional witnesses to the complete dismantling of the Sterling family empire. Chelsea shook her head frantically, her hands clenching into fists. "You are lying," she shrieked, her voice cracking into a hysterical pitch. "You are just jealous. You have always been jealous of me. Give me the money, Riley. You have millions. It is nothing to you. If you do not give me the money for the house right now, I will never speak to you again. I will cut you out of my life forever." I smiled. It was a genuine, relaxed smile. "That is the best offer you have ever made me, Chelsea. But you seem to be fundamentally misunderstanding your current position in the world. You do not have a mansion. You do not have a trust fund. Your husband is about to be arrested by federal agents, and your parents are going to lose everything they own to pay for the fraud they committed to keep you in designer shoes. You have nothing left to threaten me with. You have absolutely no power here." Chelsea let out a strangled, breathless sob. Her legs finally gave out, and she slid down the glass wall, landing in a crumpled heap right next to Jamal. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving as the reality of her total ruin finally crashed down upon her. I turned my back on her, feeling a profound, incredible lightness settling into my bones. The invisible chains of obligation and guilt that had weighed me down my entire life were completely severed. I walked back toward the table, adjusting the strap of my briefcase on my shoulder. I did not look at Patricia, who was still curled on the carpet. I did not look at Jamal, who was staring blankly at his frozen phone. As I reached the door, a hollow, raspy voice stopped me. I paused, glancing over my shoulder. Richard was still sitting at the conference table. He looked small, fragile, and utterly defeated. The commanding patriarch who had ruled our family with an iron fist of financial control was gone. Riley Richard whispered, his eyes wide and vacant, staring at me as if I were a ghost. "Where are we supposed to go?" "The bank will take the house." I looked at the man who had controlled every aspect of my existence. I looked at the man who used money as a weapon, who used affection as a currency, who used fear as a leash. He was looking at me for salvation. He was looking at me to solve the ultimate problem. "The bank is not going to take the house," Richard said, my voice steady, carrying clearly across the destroyed room. A flicker of desperate, pathetic hope sparked in his hollow eyes. He actually thought I was offering a reprieve. He actually believed even now that his bloodline granted him immunity from consequence. "The bank is not going to take the house because the bank no longer holds the primary note." I continued, mercilessly extinguishing that brief spark of hope. Richard blinked, his gray face registering a slow, agonizing confusion. "What are you talking about?" he breathed. "I bought the debt," I explained, watching the color drain completely from his face. "I bought it through a holding company 3 weeks ago when your accounts first went into arrears. You thought you were cleverly hiding your insolvency from your creditors. You thought you were buying time. But I was watching. I was tracking every missed payment. I was tracking every desperate financial maneuver." I stepped closer to the table, forcing him to look up at me. "My LLC officially owns the property. My LLC officially holds the deed. And my LLC officially filed eviction proceedings this morning at 9 o'clock. The words landed like physical blows. 1 blow, 2 blows, 3 blows, the total annihilation of his kingdom. The sprawling suburban mansion, the monument to his ego, the fortress where he had ruled our family with absolute authority, belonged to the daughter he had deemed a failure. "You have 30 days to vacate the premises." I continued, my tone entirely businesslike, completely devoid of the emotion he desperately sought. 30 days to pack whatever the federal agents do not seize. 30 days to box up your illusions. 30 days to find a new place to live. If you are not gone by the 1st of the month, the sheriff will arrive to physically remove you from my property. Patricia unleashed a sound that was barely human. It was a guttural, tearing scream that ripped through her throat. She scrambled up from the carpet, her makeup completely ruined, her designer dress stained with her own tears. The refined, untouchable socialite was gone. In her place was a cornered, vicious animal. She pointed a shaking, accusing finger directly at my face. "You are a monster!" Patricia shrieked, her chest heaving violently as she gasped for air. "You are a cold-blooded sociopath. You have no heart, you have no soul. What kind of sick, twisted monster does this to her own parents? What kind of monster destroys her own family? We raised you. We put a roof over your head. We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I did not offer a single tear in return. I absorbed her hatred and I let it fuel me. I absorbed her venom and I let it harden my spine. If refusing to be your victim makes me a monster, then I am a monster, I said, stepping directly into her space. If refusing to finance your fraud makes me a sociopath, then I am a sociopath. I will gladly be the villain in your story, Patricia. I will gladly be the villain if it means I never have to be your scapegoat again. I will gladly wear that label because protecting myself required becoming ruthless. I looked from Patricia to Richard, then down to Chelsea, who was still sobbing on the floor. You fed on my insecurities. You fed on my desire for your approval. You consumed every ounce of loyalty I offered and demanded more. You cannot negotiate with parasites, I said, my voice echoing off the glass walls. You cannot reason with parasites. You cannot beg a parasite to stop draining your life. You can only cut them off and let them starve. Patricia gasped, clapping her hands over her mouth. She stumbled backward until her hip hit the edge of the conference table, her eyes wide with the terrifying realization that her words had absolutely no power over me. The guilt trips were useless. The manipulation was dead. I looked around the room one final time, committing the scene to memory. I looked at Chelsea drowning in a puddle of her own ruined entitlement. I looked at Jamal staring into the abyss of a federal prison sentence. I looked at Patricia hyperventilating as her high society illusion burned to ash. I looked at Richard broken and hollow, stripped of every ounce of power he had ever wielded. I saw them clearly. I saw them for exactly what they were. They were small. They were weak. They were nothing to me anymore. I turned my back on the wreckage. I gathered my briefcase, feeling the solid, tangible weight of my own success in my hand. I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking sharply against the floor. I placed my hand on the heavy brass doorknob. You told me never to come back, I said, not bothering to look over my shoulder. I let the silence stretch for one agonizing final second. You told me we were moving on without you. Consider this my compliance. I opened the door, stepped out into the bright, quiet hallway, and let it snap shut behind me. The heavy oak and brass door sealed with a solid, satisfying click. It immediately muffled the chaos erupting inside, turning Patricia's hysterical wailing and Jamal's furious cursing into a dull, pathetic background hum. I stood in the corridor for a fraction of a second, adjusting my grip on my custom leather briefcase. I smoothed the lapels of my blazer. I took a deep, steadying breath. I did not look back, not even for a moment. I walked down the plush, carpeted hallway of the title company. As I approached the main lobby, I noticed a few junior associates and the front desk receptionist staring at me with wide, horrified eyes. They had undoubtedly heard the screaming. They had likely seen the federal agents swarming the building next door, where Jamal's firm was located. They knew something catastrophic had just occurred, but they had absolutely no idea how to process the woman walking out of the epicenter with perfect posture and an entirely calm expression. I gave the receptionist a polite professional nod as I passed her desk. "Have a wonderful afternoon," I said, my voice steady and clear. She blinked, utterly bewildered, and managed a weak nod in return. I pushed through the heavy glass double doors of the building and stepped out into the crisp, sunny Connecticut air. The afternoon sun hit my face bright and unforgiving, yet entirely welcome. The weather was aggressively perfect, completely at odds with the absolute destruction I had just orchestrated inside. The air smelled like pine needles and expensive landscaping, clean and sharp. For the first time in 35 years, I felt no tension in my neck. The perpetual knot of anxiety that had lived between my shoulder blades since childhood. The constant exhausting dread of wondering how I would fail them next, how I would be punished for not being Chelsea, was gone. It had vanished the moment I handed the bank the truth. It had evaporated the second I filed the eviction notice. I walked across the pristine slate courtyard toward the circular driveway. My driver, David, was standing at attention beside my sleek black town car. He was a professional, a man who had driven me to countless high-stakes corporate acquisitions and ruthless boardroom negotiations. He saw me approaching and immediately reached for the handle of the rear passenger door, opening it with a smooth, practiced motion. "Good afternoon, Ms. Sterling," David said, offering a respectful nod. "How was your meeting?" "It was highly productive, David," I replied, sliding into the spacious, climate-controlled interior of the vehicle. "We finalized all outstanding business." "Excellent," he said, closing the door behind me with a soft thud that completely severed me from the outside world. I settled into the plush leather seat, leaning my head back against the headrest. The quiet hum of the engine was the only sound in the insulated cabin. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, letting the reality of my new existence wash over me. I was completely free. I had severed the diseased limb to save the rest of my life. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the sharp, persistent buzzing of my cell phone inside my purse. I opened my bag and retrieved the device. The screen was lighting up like a slot machine. The caller ID flashed frantically. It was Chelsea. I watched the screen pulse for a few seconds. When the call went to voicemail, a barrage of text messages immediately began flooding in, stacking up on my lock screen faster than I could read them. "Riley, please pick up the phone. You cannot do this to us. You cannot let them take the house. Jamal is packing his bags. He says the feds are going to arrest him. Riley, I am begging you. You are a monster. I hate you. I will never forgive you for this. Please, Riley, I need money. My credit cards are declining. Please wire me something. Just 50,000. Please." The whiplash between violent rage and pathetic begging was classic Chelsea. She was throwing every manipulative tactic at the wall, hoping something would stick. She was searching for the broken, desperate sister who used to absorb her abuse in exchange for a scrap of family belonging. But that sister no longer existed. I had buried her today. I did not type a reply. I did not attempt to explain my position, justify my actions, or offer a final cutting remark. Parasites thrive on engagement. They feed on attention, whether it is positive or negative. The only way to win the game is to completely refuse to play. I tapped her contact name. I scrolled to the bottom of the screen. I pressed block caller. The aggressive stream of messages instantly stopped. I did not hesitate. I pulled up Jamal's contact information and pressed block. I found Patricia's number. Block. I found Richard's number. Block. I systematically went through my phone and severed every digital connection to the people who shared my DNA. I erased their access to my life with the same ruthless efficiency I applied to corporate restructuring. They no longer had the privilege of my time, my money, or my emotional energy. They were officially strangers. I locked the screen and tossed the phone onto the empty seat beside me. David glanced at me through the rearview mirror, waiting for instructions. "Where to, Ms. Sterling?" he asked quietly. I looked out the tinted window, watching the title company building disappear as the car began to move forward. "To JFK Airport, please." The drive to JFK International Airport was a blur of passing highway lights and the quiet, insulated hum of the town car. By the time I walked through the terminal doors and checked into my first-class suite on a red-eye flight, the toxic weight of Connecticut was already fading into a distant, irrelevant memory. I turned off my phone, ordered a glass of champagne, and slept perfectly for the first time in my entire life. 2 weeks later, the crisp, aggressive chill of New England was entirely replaced by the warm, salt-laced air of the Aegean Sea. I sat comfortably on the expansive private terrace of my rented luxury villa in Santorini, Europe. The brilliant, blinding white stucco walls of the surrounding architecture contrasted sharply against the deep, impossible blue of the caldera stretching out to the horizon. I wore a lightweight linen dress, my bare feet resting on the sun-warmed stone tiles. A glass of chilled local Acertico wine sat sweating gently on the wrought iron table beside my open laptop. I was completely unbothered, effortlessly managing my thriving company across a 6-hour time difference. There was no screaming here. There were no manufactured family crises, no frantic demands for cash, no suffocating guilt trips. There was only the rhythmic, soothing sound of the waves crashing against the volcanic cliffs far below. A soft, sharp chime from my laptop broke the peaceful silence. A new email had arrived in my secure inbox from Harrison, my lead corporate attorney back in the States. The subject line was perfectly clinical and entirely devoid of emotion. It read, "Sterling Estate and Associated Legal Fallout." I took a slow, appreciative sip of my wine, savoring the crisp citrus notes before moving my cursor to open the message. I expected a standard procedural update on the eviction process I had initiated against my parents. What I received instead was a comprehensive, highly detailed autopsy of my family's total destruction. Harrison did not mince words. The dominoes had fallen with spectacular, devastating speed. The day after our explosive confrontation at the title company, the bank officially reviewed the preliminary documents for Chelsea's supposed new mansion. The glaring discrepancies flagged by the Federal Fraud Department triggered an immediate, aggressive internal audit of Richard's entire portfolio. Once the bank executives realized the collateral used to secure his massive commercial loans was entirely fabricated, they did not hesitate. They immediately called in the debt. Richard was given exactly 48 hours to produce millions of dollars in liquid capital. He had absolutely nothing. The bank instantly froze all associated accounts and initiated hostile foreclosure proceedings on every property tied to his name, including the family estate. My LLC was simply waiting in the wings, perfectly positioned to absorb the remaining pieces of the property they were currently being evicted from. But the financial ruin was merely the opening act of their downfall. The internal bank audit had automatically triggered a suspicious activity report, which landed directly on the desk of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. 2 days ago, federal agents executed simultaneous unannounced search warrants. They raided Richard's corporate headquarters and Jamal's prestigious law firm at the exact same time. Harrison detailed how armed agents carried out dozens of boxes of physical files and seized every computer server in both buildings. A formal federal probe into wire fraud conspiracy and money laundering had officially been opened. The illusion of their high society wealth built entirely on forged signatures and shell companies was completely annihilated in the public eye. Harrison noted that Patricia was currently residing in a mid-range extended-stay motel, her country club memberships instantly revoked. Chelsea's credit cards were entirely locked, and she was reportedly attempting to sell her designer handbags online to afford basic living expenses because her assets were tied to Jamal's frozen accounts. I read the details with a profound sense of detachment. They had dug their own graves, and I was simply watching the dirt cave in. Then I scrolled to the bottom of the email, my eyes catching Harrison's final bolded paragraph. It was the ultimate poetic conclusion to their decades of toxic loyalty and absolute greed. Harrison had a reliable contact inside the federal prosecutor's office. Jamal staring down the barrel of immediate disbarment and a mandatory minimum sentence of a decade in federal prison had completely cracked under the pressure. The golden son-in-law did not hesitate to save his own skin. Jamal officially took a plea deal and turned state's witness against his own father-in-law. He handed over every encrypted email, every illegal ledger, and every damning piece of evidence directly to the federal agents. I read Harrison's final sentence twice, letting the sheer magnitude of Jamal's betrayal wash over me. There is absolutely no loyalty among thieves. Jamal had recognized that the ship was sinking, and he had immediately thrown his commanding father-in-law directly to the sharks to secure his own life raft. I closed the email window. I took another slow, appreciative sip of my wine. The crisp, complex citrus notes of the Assyrtiko perfectly matched the sharp, satisfying reality of my new existence. The Aegean sun was beginning its gradual descent toward the horizon, painting the iconic white stucco architecture of Santorini in brilliant sweeping strokes of gold and amber. The air was warm, fragrant, and entirely still. My laptop chimed again. This time it was not an email from my legal team. It was a Google alert I had set up weeks ago for the Sterling family name. The notification contained a direct link to the Fairfield Elite Chronicle, the premier digital gossip blog for Connecticut's wealthiest and most ruthless zip codes. The high society of our hometown operated on an aggressive currency of reputation and wealth. Smelling blood in the water, the local media had descended like vultures. The headline was brutal and uncompromising: "The Fall of the House of Sterling, Fraud Foreclosure and a Midnight Escape." I clicked the link, settling deeper into my cushioned lounge chair. The author of the article did not hold back a single drop of venom. For 3 decades, Richard and Patricia had looked down their noses at their neighbors. They had established themselves as the ultimate, unassailable arbiters of taste, wealth, and success. They had demanded respect through financial intimidation. Now that same community was gleefully feasting on their absolute ruin. The article painted a painfully vivid, humiliating picture of their departure. The bank had officially taken possession of the estate, and the eviction deadline had arrived. There were no professional moving crews. There were no sleek, climate-controlled moving vans meticulously packing up their curated life. Last night, under the cover of darkness, the former king and queen of Connecticut society were spotted fleeing their foreclosed fortress. Witnesses reported seeing a battered, rented U-Haul truck parked hastily on the pristine cobblestone driveway at 2 in the morning. Richard, a man who refused to be seen in anything less than a tailored suit, was photographed wearing a wrinkled tracksuit. He was struggling, physically sweating, and straining to load cheap, mismatched cardboard boxes into the back of the rusted rental truck. Patricia was completely unrecognizable. The reigning matriarch of the country club was seen pacing the driveway in ruined slippers and a haphazardly tied trench coat. According to the article, she was frantically clutching a single crystal vase to her chest, as if it were a life preserver in a stormy ocean. They were sneaking out in the dead of night, utterly terrified of facing the judgmental, mocking stares of the neighbors they had spent years belittling. They left behind the grand pianos, the custom-imported furniture, and the massive crystal chandeliers. They could only take whatever fit into the back of a rented truck before the sun came up. Their humiliation was absolute. But the gossip blog saved its most vicious, cutting paragraphs for the golden child. Chelsea Sterling, the woman who had arrogantly demanded a $1 million mansion just 14 days prior, was facing her own spectacular collapse. The moment Jamal turned state's witness and his accounts were permanently seized by the federal government, Chelsea did exactly what she was trained to do. She abandoned ship. According to the attached court filings, Chelsea had officially filed for divorce. Her lawyers released a pathetic, desperate public statement claiming she was a completely innocent victim of her husband's financial manipulation. She claimed she had absolutely no knowledge of the wire fraud, the money laundering, or the forged collateral. She was frantically trying to save herself from the financial crater Jamal had created. But the federal courts were not easily swayed by her manufactured tears, and without my money to shield her, Chelsea had nowhere to go. The article concluded with a photograph that must have shattered her fragile, narcissistic soul. It showed Chelsea carrying a black plastic trash bag full of clothes across a cracked asphalt parking lot. The golden child was officially moving into a brutalist brick apartment building on the wrong side of town. To protect herself from total financial ruin, she was forced into a cramped, outdated 2-bedroom apartment. There were no marble countertops, there were no sweeping, dramatic staircases. There was only chipped linoleum, a shared laundry room down a poorly lit hallway, and the crushing, inescapable weight of reality. I looked away from the screen and out toward the infinite expanse of the ocean. I closed the laptop with a soft, definitive click. The Sterling family had finally received exactly what they had earned. I closed my laptop with a firm, satisfying snap. The metallic click echoed softly against the stone walls of the terrace, a final punctuation mark on a lifetime of extortion. I leaned back in my cushioned lounge chair and let the Aegean breeze wash over my skin. Below me, the caldera stretched out in a breathtaking expanse of sapphire water. White sailboats glided silently across the bay, looking like tiny toys from my elevated vantage point. A local server in crisp white linen approached silently, replacing my empty wineglass with a fresh, chilled pour of Assyrtiko and leaving a small plate of marinated olives. I thanked him with a nod and took a slow, deliberate sip. The contrast was almost too poetic to ignore. While I was sitting on top of the world, bathed in Mediterranean sunlight and entirely unbothered by a single financial worry, the people who had spent 3 decades trying to break me were drowning in the squalor of their own making. I pictured Richard sweating in a cheap tracksuit, wrestling with cardboard boxes in the dead of night. I pictured Patricia hyperventilating in a budget motel stripped of her country club armor. I pictured Chelsea, the undisputed golden child, dragging garbage bags full of designer clothes into a linoleum-floored apartment on the wrong side of town. A strange, fleeting sensation fluttered in my chest. It was not guilt. It was not regret. For a fraction of a second, I felt a sharp, hollow ache for the family I never actually had. I mourned the parents who should have protected me, who should have celebrated my intellect instead of weaponizing it. I mourned the sister who could have been a confidant instead of a ruthless competitor. I allowed myself to feel that tiny sting of sorrow, acknowledging the unfairness of being born into a bloodline that viewed me solely as an ATM and a convenient scapegoat. But the sadness lasted less than a minute. It was rapidly and entirely consumed by a tidal wave of profound, intoxicating relief. The invisible chain that had choked me since childhood was completely severed. I was no longer carrying the suffocating weight of their toxic expectations. I was no longer financing their delusions of grandeur. I was no longer the villain in their manufactured tragedies. I had stepped off their rigged game board, and in doing so, I had won everything. The air entering my lungs felt lighter, cleaner, untainted by the smog of Connecticut manipulation. For the first time in 35 years, my phone was not a ticking time bomb. There were no frantic text messages demanding wire transfers to cover bounced checks. There were no voicemails from Patricia telling me how selfish I was for prioritizing my career over Chelsea's latest disaster. The absolute silence from the States was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I had weaponized my success to protect myself using the very skills they despised to dismantle their fraudulent empire. They had always mocked my corporate ambition, calling me cold and calculating, yet it was that exact precision that saved me from being dragged down with them. Jamal was singing to the federal prosecutors. Richard was facing total financial ruin and a looming indictment. Patricia was a social pariah. Chelsea was learning the harsh reality of living on a budget. They had built their entire kingdom on quicksand, and I had simply refused to continue buying the sand. My peaceful isolation was gently interrupted by the vibrating buzz of my cell phone resting on the glass table. I did not tense. I did not dread the caller ID. I picked up the device and smiled when I saw the name flashing on the screen. It was Marcus Vance, the chief executive officer of my firm. I swiped to answer, bringing the phone to my ear. "Good evening, Marcus. Or rather, good morning to you." Riley, his booming voice came through the speaker, crisp and energized despite the early hour in New York. "I know you are technically on a leave of absence, but I had to call you directly. I just finished reviewing the post-mortem on the Sterling acquisition and the subsequent fallout." I sat up slightly, resting my elbows on the armrests of the chair. "I assume the federal probe has complicated the commercial real estate landscape back home," I said, keeping my tone entirely professional. "Complicated is an understatement." Marcus laughed, a rich, booming sound of pure satisfaction. "It is an absolute bloodbath out there. Richard Sterling's entire portfolio is in federal receivership, and 3 of our biggest competitors were heavily exposed to his fraudulent collateral. They are hemorrhaging capital as we speak. But not us." I allowed a small knowing smile to touch my lips. "Not us," I agreed. "Your risk management protocols on that mega deal were nothing short of surgical." Marcus continued, his voice shifting from jovial to absolute seriousness. "You identified the rot in their financial foundation months before the feds even caught a whiff of the money laundering. You insulated this firm perfectly, pulled our capital out at the exact right millisecond, and positioned us to buy up their prime real estate assets for pennies on the dollar during the foreclosure auctions. The board is absolutely floored, Riley. You saved us tens of millions and handed us a monopoly in the sector." "I simply did my job, Marcus. I analyze data and I eliminate liabilities." "You did more than your job," he corrected sharply. You proved that you have the exact kind of ruthless visionary instinct this firm needs at the highest level. I am not calling just to offer my congratulations, Riley. I am calling to make this official. The executive board voted unanimously this morning. We are offering you a full executive partnership complete with equity sharing and a corner office on the top floor. We want you leading the entire acquisition division the second you land back in the States. I accept your offer, Marcus, I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of surprise. Have the new contracts waiting on my desk Monday morning. I ended the call and set the phone face down on the glass table. I looked out over the Aegean Sea one last time, committing the profound silence to memory before turning back to pack my bags. Santorini had served its primary purpose. It had given me the distance to watch the implosion from afar. Now it was time to go home and claim my kingdom. 6 months later, I stood staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office on the 52nd floor of our Manhattan headquarters. The city lights sprawled out below me like a glittering, endless grid of pure ambition. Snow was falling gently against the glass, but inside the climate control kept the temperature at a perfect, comfortable warmth. I smoothed the skirt of my midnight blue silk evening gown. Tonight was not just another corporate victory lap. Tonight was deeply personal. Downstairs in the grand ballroom, my firm was hosting our inaugural winter charity gala. I had personally directed the philanthropic arm of our new acquisition division to establish a massive educational trust. The trust was entirely dedicated to funding full-ride university scholarships for underprivileged youths from neglected urban districts. It was a deliberate, calculated tribute to my grandfather, the real Theodore Sterling, the man who actually built things from the ground up with calloused hands, who believed in the raw power of potential, and who would have been utterly sickened by the bloated, parasitic existence his son had created. Richard had spent decades hoarding wealth to build a fragile monument to his own inflated ego. I was spending my wealth to tear down systemic barriers for kids who actually possessed the grit and intellect to succeed. I turned away from the breathtaking view of the skyline and walked over to my massive mahogany desk to grab my evening clutch. As I reached for the leather bag, my computer monitor flared to life, pulling me out of sleep mode. A breaking news alert flashed across the screen from the Hartford Business Journal. I paused, leaning forward slightly to read the bold headline. Former real estate mogul Richard Sterling pleads guilty to federal mortgage fraud. I clicked the link, allowing myself a moment of pure, uninterrupted satisfaction as I read the highly detailed autopsy of his total collapse. The federal prosecutors had absolutely gutted him. Facing decades in a federal penitentiary, Richard had been forced to abandon his arrogant posturing and accept a humiliating plea agreement. Due to his rapidly declining health and his complete desperate cooperation in forfeiting his fabricated assets, the judge had granted him a suspended sentence. But he did not escape unpunished. The court had ordered crippling, insurmountable financial restitution. Every single dollar he ever managed to scrape together for the rest of his natural life would be immediately garnished to repay the banks and investors he had so brazenly defrauded. He was legally prohibited from ever holding a corporate officer position or securing a commercial loan again. He was reduced to a penniless, disgraced ghost, banished to live out his remaining years in complete obscurity alongside Patricia, who was reportedly working a cashier shift at a local pharmacy just to afford their rent. The article also provided a brief, damning update on his co-conspirators. Jamal had officially been stripped of his law license. The State Bar Association voted for permanent disbarment, citing egregious ethical violations and active participation in a criminal enterprise. The Golden son-in-law was entirely unemployable in the legal sector, his pristine reputation completely incinerated. I read the final paragraph, feeling the last lingering phantom weight of my childhood dissolve into absolute nothingness. There was no anger left in my chest. There was no lingering bitterness or desire for further vengeance. There was only the profound, brilliant clarity of total closure. The Sterling family as I had known it was entirely dead. They had drowned in the shallow pool of their own limitless greed, and I had simply stopped throwing them life preservers. I smiled. It was a genuine, effortless expression that reached all the way to my eyes. I closed the browser window and shut down the computer. I picked up my clutch, turned off the office lights, and stepped out into the plush, brightly lit hallway. The distant, elegant sound of a string quartet drifted up from the ballroom below. Laughter and the sharp clinking of crystal champagne glasses echoed through the marble corridors. Down there, hundreds of influential, brilliant people were waiting. They were my colleagues, my strategic partners, my chosen family. They were individuals who respected me exclusively for the sharpness of my intellect, the ruthless efficiency of my negotiations, and the undeniable results I delivered. They did not care about my bloodline. They did not view me as a convenient bank account to fund their toxic delusions. I walked toward the elevators, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished stone floor. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was no longer the disappointment. I was exactly who I had built myself to be. I pressed the call button, watching the heavy brass doors slide open to welcome me, and stepped inside to join my real life. The brass elevator doors glided shut, sealing me in a quiet cocoon of polished mahogany and mirrored glass as I descended to the grand ballroom. When the doors parted on the ground floor, a symphony of sophisticated energy washed over me. Waitstaff carrying heavy silver trays of champagne wove seamlessly through crowds of Manhattan's financial elite. The room was breathtakingly elegant. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, fractured glow over tables adorned with towering arrangements of white winter orchids. I walked into the room, and the shift in atmosphere was immediate and palpable. Colleagues turned to greet me with genuine warmth, investors offered respectful nods, and Marcus raised his glass in a triumphant salute from across the room. These people were titans of industry, and they viewed me as their absolute equal. I thought briefly of Richard hauling cheap cardboard boxes in the freezing Connecticut night, and Patricia clutching a single vase in her ruined slippers. The stark contrast between their pathetic reality and my current environment was the ultimate validation of my choices. Marcus eventually tapped his glass, drawing the room's attention, and introduced me with glowing, unreserved praise. I walked up the velvet-carpeted steps to the podium, the bright spotlight warming my face. I looked out over the sea of expectant faces, feeling a deep, anchoring sense of absolute purpose. I spoke clearly into the microphone. We are here tonight to officially launch the Theodore Sterling Educational Trust. I deliberately chose to name this foundation after my grandfather. He was a man who understood that true wealth is never simply inherited. It is forged in the fires of adversity. He built his life with his own bare hands, relying on nothing but his intellect, his integrity, and his relentless grit. Somewhere along the line, the meaning of the Sterling name was deeply corrupted by unearned entitlement and shallow, toxic greed. Tonight, we are taking that legacy back and rewriting its future. We are funding comprehensive full-ride university scholarships for brilliant, underprivileged students who have the raw drive to succeed but lack the financial safety net to try. We are actively investing in potential, not empty pedigree. True legacy is not about hoarding stolen assets or demanding unearned respect. It is about creating tangible opportunities for those who are willing to bleed to earn their place in the world. The applause that followed was deafening. It was not polite, obligatory clapping. It was genuine, thunderous approval from people who understood the exact value of hard work and strategic vision. I stepped down from the stage, immediately engulfed by a wave of handshakes and sincere congratulations. Board members praised the initiative, while rival firm executives offered grudging, highly respectful compliments on my recent aggressive maneuvering in the commercial real estate sector. Every interaction reinforced the beautiful reality of my new existence. I was no longer a tool to be utilized and discarded by toxic relatives. I was the master architect of my own destiny, surrounded completely by a community I had chosen and cultivated through mutual respect and shared competence. An hour later, I was standing near the towering floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the glittering, snow-dusted expanse of Central Park. I held a fresh flute of champagne, enjoying a rare moment of quiet observation. An older gentleman approached me from the crowd. He was a prominent venture capitalist I had negotiated fiercely against the previous quarter. He smiled warmly, holding up his crystal glass in a silent toast. That was an extraordinarily moving speech, Riley, he said smoothly. Your grandfather would be incredibly proud of what you are doing with his name and his memory. I thanked him, accepting the high compliment gracefully. He tilted his head, a look of polite, innocent curiosity crossing his weathered features. And your parents? He asked brightly. They must be absolutely thrilled to see you named executive partner at your age. Your entire family must be bursting with pride tonight to witness your success. I did not flinch. I did not offer a polite manufactured lie to protect their bruised egos or preserve their shattered social standing. I simply took a slow, appreciative sip of my champagne. The crisp liquid danced lightly on my tongue, tasting of absolute victory. I turned my gaze back to the window, looking out at the dazzling, infinite skyline of the city that I had conquered. I felt a serene, unshakable calm radiate through my entire body, banishing any lingering ghosts of my past. I do not have a family, I said with a serene, unshakable smile. I have an empire, and I built it entirely on my own. The most profound lesson from Riley's journey is that true worth is never inherited. It is forged. It is forged in rejection. It is forged in the silence of empty rooms. It is forged when you stop seeking validation from those incapable of giving it. We often chain ourselves to toxic loyalty, believing blood demands absolute sacrifice. Yet Riley teaches us that breaking those chains is not a failure. It is the ultimate triumph. Your value is defined solely by the empire you build yourself. If you have walked away to find your power, share your story and comment below.